screen.
Okay, thank you very much. And a thank you to Rabbi Yirmiyahu Kaganoff for his online halachic discourses, which I've drawn the sources from. Okay, so for many people, Kaddish, and saying the mourners Kaddish in particular, is a very, very important, very personal, often emotional event, connection that they have. And when we hear the word Kaddish, normally the first thought that comes to mind is Kaddish being said for someone who has passed away from the world. That is the connotation, I think, that most people have when they hear Kaddish. What's interesting is that the Gemara has a number of mentions of Kaddish, but never in connection to a mourner saying it. Now, we know that Kaddish comprises parts of our tefillah, parts of our prayers, parts of our davening. And as we go from one stage to another stage in our prayers and our davening, we'll say what's called a chatzi Kaddish, the half Kaddish. And after each Shmona Esrei, after each Amida, which is the personal prayer that a person silently stands and says before God, then communally, when there's a minyan, we say the Kaddish Titkabel. Titkabel literally means acceptance. And that includes a sentence of, may our prayers be accepted before you. So those are the classic Kaddishes that we have as part of the davening. And then we also have this concept of a mourner's Kaddish. And we're going to see how that came about, how that it was instituted, and how it is practiced today in different communities, in our community, and why. So the first source that we have is a mention of Kaddish in the Gemara. It's in Tractate, the Talmud Brachot 3a, and we have it both there in Hebrew and in the English. What I didn't copy over here was the beginning of this conversation was Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef was traveling, and he needed to pray, he needed to daven, and he ducked into a ruin that was towards the side of the road. And the Talmud says that he encountered none other than Elijah the prophet. And there was an ensuing conversation between the two of them. And Elijah told him that it's best not to daven in such a place. Right? And then Elijah said, did you hear a certain sound? And he said, yes, I heard what seemed to be almost like a cry. And Elijah said to him that that was the sound of God's cry when his children, when the Jewish people are in exile. And he went on and he said, V'lo zu bilvad, and more than that, not only this, whenever the Jews enter into the shuls, right, the synagogues, ulabate midrashot, and the houses of study, where also prayer would take place, va'onin, and they respond, which is a response to Kaddish, Yehei Shmei Hagadol Mevorach, may his great name be recognized and be acknowledged. Right? We say Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Liolam Ulomei Al Maya. We have a slightly longer version of that exclamation. Elijah told Rabbi Yossi, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Menanei Arosho, God nods his head, so to speak. Va'omer, and he says, Ashrei HaMelech Shemakal Sanoto Beveito. How fortunate is a king who is properly praised in his home. Kach Malo La'av Shehiglo et Banav. But what is a father whose sons have been exiled? Va'oy Lehem Lebanim. And woe to the children, to the sons, Shegalu Me'al Shulchan Avihem, who have been exiled from the table of their father. So that, he said, is the response, the heavenly God's response whenever we say this Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevarach, may his great name be made great, Le'olam U'lomei Amayah, for eternity and all of eternity. That is God's response. So again, this is a mention of Kaddish that we find in the Gemara. But we don't find any mention of a mourner's Kaddish. That is as part of the tefillah, as part of the regular prayers, where again, Kaddish is there as a mainstay of our prayers. So where did this concept then of Kaddish Yatom, of a mourner saying Kaddish, and of a mourner being the one who leads the services, in particular when they're able to, where does that concept come from? So Rabbi Kaganoff brings, I just brought his translation from the Or Zarua. Now what's fascinating is, the Or Zarua is a Rishon, let's say the years 900 through 1200. Is a period that we call the period of the Rishonim. He brings a story of Rabbi Akiva. Now, Rabbi Akiva, of course, is in the time of the Talmud. So, this is an event that took place during the time of the Talmud, yet we don't find in the Talmud itself a mention of Kaddish that being said by the mourners. It's a bit of a frightening story. Rabbi Akiva once saw a man covered head to toe with soot, carrying on his head the load that one would expect 10 men to carry, and running like a horse. Rabbi Akiva stopped the man and asked him, "Why are you working so hard? If you are a slave and your master works you this hard, I will redeem you. If you are so poor that you need to work this hard to support your family, I'll find you better employment." The man replied, "Do not detain me, lest those appointed over me get angry at me." Rabbi Akiva asked him, "Who are you, and what is your story?" The man answered that he was actually, is the word an apparition, right? He saw a form of a person, but it was not a regular person in this world. "I died, and every day they send me like this to chop and carry these amounts of wood. When I am finished, they burn me with the wood that I have gathered." Rabbi Akiva asked him, what was his profession? What special was it? He was alive, right? Like, what did you do in your lifetime that this is your hereafter? To which he answered that he had been a tax collector. Now, importantly, right, nothing against someone who works for the IRS, right? In their day meant someone who purchased from the government the contract to collect taxes. It was completely arbitrary, and you would take advantage, cruelly take advantage of those whom you could take advantage of, who favored the rich by overtaxing the poor, which the Or Zarua refers to as they would kill the poor. Rabbi Akiva said, "Have you heard from your overseers whether there is any way to release you from this judgment?" The man responded, "Don't detain me. They'll become angry with me. I have heard that there is no solution for me except for one thing that I cannot do. Wow. I was told that if I have a son who would lead the congregation in the recital of Baruch Hu, right, which is what the Chazan, what the leader does. Baruch Hu et Hashem Mevorach, let us bless God who is blessed, and everyone responds, Baruch Hashem Mevorach, blessed is God who is blessed for all eternity. If I would have someone who could lead in the Baruch Hu or recite Kaddish, right? So here we see the two ideas. Leading in Baruch Hu, which is being the Chazan, leading the congregation, or recite Kaddish, so that the tzibur, the congregation, would answer Yehei Shmei Rabbah Mevorach, which is what we read about in the Gemara above. They would release me immediately from the suffering. However, I did not leave any sons but a pregnant wife, and I have no idea if she gave birth to a male child, and if she did, I have no idea whether anyone is concerned about teaching him, since I have not had a friend left in the world. I guess based on the way that he would collect his taxes, he was not necessarily Mr. Popular. At that moment, Rabbi Akiva accepted upon himself to find whether a son existed, and indeed, if he did, to teach him Torah until he could fulfill what was required to save his father. Rabbi Akiva asked the man for his name, his wife's name, and the name of the town. My name is Akiva. My wife's name is Shoshniva, and I come from Lutkia. Rabbi Akiva traveled to Lutkia. Asked people they knew of a former resident, Akiva, husband of Shoshniva, to which he received the following answer: let the bones of that scoundrel be ground to pulp. When Akiva asked about Shoshniva, he was answered, may any memory of her be erased from the world. Obviously a very popular couple. Right. Yeah. He then inquired about their child and was answered, he is uncircumcised. We did not involve ourselves in any way to provide him with a Brit Milah. Akiva immediately began to search for the son, whom he located, and it turned out he was already a young adult. Rabbi Akiva performed a Brit Milah on him and attempted to teach him Torah, but was unable to do so. This person was like a rock, right? Nothing at all was penetrating. For 40 days, Rabbi Akiva fasted. Right? Of course, when we fast, the series of fasts, you eat at night. Praying that the child be able to study Torah. At which time a heavenly voice announced, Rabbi Akiva, now go and teach him Torah. Which is astounding, as an aside, the lengths that Rabbi Akiva was willing to go to save a soul. A complete stranger, wasn't a relative, this wasn't a great-great-grandfather, a long-lost brother, or a great-uncle. A complete stranger who was a scoundrel of the greatest degree, evidenced by what his hereafter looked like. Rabbi Akiva traveled, Rabbi Akiva tried, Rabbi Akiva fasted for 40 days. Rabbi Akiva then went and taught him Torah, Shema, the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah, Birkat Hamazon, grace after meals, and then brought him to shul in order for him to lead the tzibur, the congregation, by reciting Kaddish and Baruch Hu, which he did. To which the tzibur responded, Yehei Shmei Rabam Avarach Liolam Lomel Maya. That's the response to the Kaddish. And Baruch Hashem Avarach Liolam Va'ed. Blesses Hashem, who is blessed for all eternity. At that moment, Akiva, the husband of Shoshniva, was released from this punishment. This Akiva immediately came to Rabbi Akiva in a dream and told him, may it be Hashem's will that you eventually will reach your eternal rest in the Garden of Eden, for you have saved me from this purgatory. This story is also found in Masechet Kala Rabbatai. Okay. So this is the story that the Or Zarua brings. Now, we don't find much about this in the halachic discussions until we come to the tshuva of the Rivash. Okay, the Rivash writes, and I have it for you here in Hebrew, there is no English for it. So I apologize. And, okay. Now, this story serves as the basis for a mourner saying Kaddish. Let's see how that came about. So, a question was sent to the Rivash. Right? Okadafta v'nahadnu b'sfar. We have a custom in Spain that we say Kaddish to Rabbanan for someone whose father or parent has died during that year. And it's based on a story that we just quoted above. Right? And the person asked, do you know where the source of this story is? To which he responded, the story is not in our Talmud. Perhaps it's found in one of the Medrashim. But he says, I found in a sefer of the Orchot Chaim, who writes as follows. The reason why they established Kaddish is for a father or a mother, right? And there's a mitzvah to do that. And then he goes on to say, just one second. Right, and they tell this, and he quotes us another similar story of them saying Kaddish. Right, that again this person needed someone to say the Kaddish for him. Sorry, it came out so small, I myself having problems with it. Yeah, so there he tells a similar story, and he says, "V'yesh mitpalalim b'chol motzei Shabbat tfilat arvit." There are those also who will daven on a Saturday night. They will lead the services in Mariv, and also there is the idea of, and we'll soon see where that comes from. There's also the idea of saying the maftir. Right? The maftir is one that gets the last added on aliyah Shabbat morning and then reads the Haftorah. Okay. Now, so from here we see from this story, which again in the Talmud we don't find it, but this story is what introduces us to the concept that besides Kaddishes that are said as part of the davening, there is this aspect of Kaddish being said to elevate the soul of someone who has died. Right? And we'll discuss a little more further on, but the idea is that we understand that this is the world of doing. After this world, there's nothing more that a person can do. Okay? And we've mentioned before that the lesson of Shabbos, of the Sabbath, which is a weekly lesson to us, is that during the week, prepare, stop. At this point, you can no longer prepare, but whatever you have prepared, you can enjoy. Next week, the same exact lesson. Prepare, light the candles, stop. Right? And that is to teach us that our life is given to us to prepare, and then at a certain point, when our soul leaves us, stop. At that point, a person can't do any more. However, that which is in this world because of that person, that is in the merit of that person, that can continue to generate. And therefore children who are doing things, or if money was donated to institutions, if money was donated to institutions that are still doing good things, then that person is still alive, so to speak. That the person has created is still going on in this world. And therefore a child leading the services and leading others to bless God, to sanctify God's name, that continues to generate for the person even in the world to come. Okay. Now, later on, around the year 1400, we have some questions that were posed to the Maharil. One question that was posed, and from there we get a glimpse at what was going on. The question that was posed was, if someone is uncertain whether a parent is alive or dead, would a person say the Kaddish or not? Now, in our world, that seems, how could that be? But understand, going back not that long ago, first of all, just Jews in the Holocaust have a situation where children were separated from parents and have to assume that they've died. Though we do have situations of siblings being reunited decades and decades later. But certainly before we had the transportation, the communication that we take for granted today, right? So a person would leave and have no way of knowing if parents are still alive or not. So there...
Sometimes, rarely, but still today, if there's a case of mental illness and schizophrenia and then someone drops out of the...
That is correct. Even today that can be. That is correct.
The child could have done everything they could and then...
That is correct. That is correct. So the Maharal says, Lomer Kaddish, the a person saying Kaddish without knowing the parent is alive. So Medina, right? So a person is not obligated to do that. The assumption should be that the parent is alive. Okay? However, but in a situation that a person wants to, they can. But when there is someone who definitely is a mourner, someone who definitely knows that the parent has died, then he will supersede you. He's a definite. You don't know. He will take precedence over you. Now, what do we see from this Maharal now? What do we see? Why should there be any precedence of him over me? Why don't we both say it? What's clear from the Maharal is that their custom was only one person would go ahead and say it. And therefore, if this person definitely is a mourner, and you don't know if your parents are alive or not, so you are in doubt, so he, as a definite mourner, will supersede you. And therefore, only one, it seems clear from the Maharal, that only one person was saying Kaddish. That was how it was done in those days. So therefore that person will say it. Right? And Maharal says, for this reason, he himself did not say Kaddish when he was uncertain whether his parents were still alive. But if there is no mourner there, and a person is unsure, then that person, right, can lead services if they're able to, and can say the Kaddish. So we see from the Maharal over here that only one person recites Kaddish at a time, right? And therefore, and someone whose parents are alive should not say the mourner's Kaddish, because by doing that he's taking it away from others, right? And if there is no mourner present to lead the services, then the person who's uncertain can go ahead and lead it.
So
Yeah.
if there's two people who are definitely...
So we'll come to that.
Okay.
Okay. So now we have a situation that we see that the custom became in Israel to say the Kaddish, for a mourner saying the Kaddish, and we also see this idea that only one person says it at a time. There's another Maharal, again only Hebrew, sorry. He says this Kaddish was established after we say some psukim of Rabbi Elazar and Chanina, and then we say a Kaddish Rabbanan, or we say some Tehillim, and then we say it, and the mourners say it. Why? Because they're not able to say Baruch Hu if they're not bar mitzvahed. Oh, so now all of a sudden we see something new over here. Right? The mourner's Kaddish was established for those who can't say the regular Kaddishes. Why can't they say the regular Kaddishes? They're not yet bar mitzvahed. So they're unable to lead the services there. Right? If they're not obligated, they can't lead others in their obligation. And therefore all the Kaddishes are established by the Rabbanan. But this one, the mourner's Kaddish, is not an obligation. Oh, since it's not an obligation, therefore it could be led by someone who himself is not yet of age to be obligated.
So then how come
Just go, let's hear it through first. Right? Therefore, minors are able to say it. Right? Now, in the case of Rabbi Akiva we mentioned above, we mentioned there Yehei Shmei Rabbah. And therefore it seems to me that even people who are Gedolim, people who are of age, so they're all vying to be the one, again, understanding that only one person was saying it, they're all vying to be the one to say the mourner's Kaddish. That's not what they should be vying for. What should they be vying to do? Lead the services. And lead the congregation in the obligatory Kaddishes. Because in general we always say that it is greater to do something that one is obligated than one is not obligated. Even though you might think if you're not obligated and you do it, that's great. But in fact, when you're obligated to do it, then it's a true responsibility that you have and then it's harder to do it, right? It's easy, right? Very often it's easy to do a chesed for someone else, to keep doing the same chesed for your family, for your spouse, for your parent. That gets a little bit more challenging, right? So we should vie for the main Kaddishes, which means leading the services. And then he says something fascinating. A minor can do, we normally don't do this, but a minor can do the Haftorah, right? Can do the Maftir and the Haftorah. He won't get a regular Aliyah, but he can get that Aliyah. And he says that's why we have a custom that will give that to a mourner, to a minor mourner, a young mourner. Why? Because that's the only way that a minor, a non-bar mitzvah, could lead the congregation in Baruch Hu. When he gets an aliyah, he says, Baruch Hu Hashem HaMavorach, and everyone answers. Right? So that's the only way that a person will be able to do that. Okay. So we see that already in the time of the Maharil, people were giving more importance. I mentioned that when you say Kaddish to someone, they think of a mourner. Right, word association, Kaddish, mourner, right? But we see already back in the 1400s, at the time of the Maharil, also people associated that and thought that it's more important. The mourner's Kaddish is more important than the regular Kaddishes, which in fact is not the case. Now, going back to what we saw from the Maharil when he spoke about a person who's unsure about their obligation. So he said, well, he will not take precedence over someone who is fully obligated. So we see that the custom there was only one person to do it. Okay. Now, being only one person would do it, who would do it? Right? Whoever grabs it. Right? Whoever chops it. Whoever managed to do it. Now you can imagine just how much community love and unity that would engender. Once you hear Rabbi Akiva's story of how helpful it is, I'm going to say it, my father, my mother, it can get a little bit a little bit difficult. To resolve this problem, there were two approaches that were made to deal with the issue. Amongst the Sfardim, the accepted approach was that anyone wanted to say Kaddish did so, and everyone recited Kaddish in unison. Amongst Ashkenazim, the approach was established rules of priority, right? A parent over a sibling, right? There were established rules of priority of who would be the one to say these Kaddishes. Now, by the late 18th, 19th century, amongst the Ashkenazic community, it started to become the general practice to also allow a number of people to say the Kaddish at once, with the exception being the German communities. To this day, if you go to amongst this called the Yekka community, the German Jews community, if you go to their shuls, so there they make it very clear to any person visiting, only one person says Kaddish, and the Gabe goes around, who are you saying Kaddish for? Who are you saying Kaddish for? And one of the shuls like David in Israel, this would be the case. Who are you saying Kaddish for? And the Gabe would say, okay, you'll say the first Kaddish, you'll say the second Kaddish, you'll say the third Kaddish if there's three, right? And the others would not say Kaddish. Now, this then became slightly adjusted, that at the end of davening we say a Kaddish to Rabbanan, it's called the Rabbi's Kaddish, and that, even in the communities where only one would say it, for that Kaddish, that everyone would be able to join in on. Okay? Now it's interesting to note, he makes an interesting point, that perhaps the Sfardim, the reason, well, we'll come to that afterwards. Now, in the mid-19th century, there was a question that was posed as follows. A community had two large shuls and several shtibelach. Shtibelach are really small minyanim that sprout up in different places. The main shul was in serious disrepair. They made an agreement to close all the smaller shuls, to pool the resources, and invest in one large, beautiful new shul and have no other minyanim. They were all going to come together into one big, beautiful shul instead of a number of splinters. Included was a decision that all the mourners can now recite the Kaddish together in unison. We understand that, right? Because if you have 5 shuls, so everyone gets to say a Kaddish. Now everyone's together, so they said that that's what they should do. Some people had an issue and said they should follow the older custom. Okay? So they sent a question to Rav Ber Oppenheim, who was the Rav and Av Beitin of the larger area there. He felt that they should all say the Kaddishes together, but first, before he would publicize that, he sent a letter to the to Rav Yaakov Ettlinger, known as the Aruch L'Ner. He responded as follows: one should not change the established minhag of Germany and beforehand Poland, which had been in practice for more than 300 years, and only one person should say the Kaddish at a time. Furthermore, he said that you can't compare the Ashkenazic to the Sephardic customs. He said the Sephardic custom is to everyone davens in unison, right? If you daven by our Sephardic minyan here, right, when it comes to Psukei de Zimra, instead of everyone, saying quietly to themselves, they say it out loud, right? One person's leading, but everyone is saying it together with them. They are used to saying things in unison. And therefore, when they say Kaddish, that it is synchronized. Everyone is saying it at the same time. However, he wrote, when Ashkenazim try to do that, no one hears the Kaddishes. This one's over here, that one's over here. He's starting the second line, he's finishing the third, he's up to the fourth word, right? It's just this whole jumble of different people saying different things. No one knows when to answer Amen, who to answer Amen to. It becomes a big mess, right? And he says he wants to abolish this custom of everyone saying it together, since as a result no one hears or responds appropriately to Kaddish. What happened, the custom today, is, again, besides the German communities, many people say Kaddish together. One of the things that I strongly not just encourage, or sometimes have to impose over here, is that people gather together and they say it at the same pace. No one should go too fast. No one should go too slow. We've got to find, and sometimes I feel, someone said it sounds like, Rabbi, it sounds like you're herding cats, right? H-E-R-D, not H-U-R-T, right? But sometimes I'll get up and stand by the bima, right? And I'll do it very loud in order to keep everyone together. Because let's not forget, the reason for this mourner's Kaddish is the response. It's not that I'm saying the Kaddish. It's that my Kaddish is inspiring and eliciting the proper responses. If we're doing it in a way that no one's responding, no one knows where you are, where who are, it's just this mess of different points of Kaddish, then I'm not accomplishing anything. And I'm not eliciting the proper response. So therefore, we do have the practice that many say it together, besides, again, the German communities, but care must be taken to say it in a synchronized fashion in order that we will accomplish what is meant to accomplish. Now, taking it a step further, but in terms of leading the davening, there we're not going to have a duet or a trio leading the davening. right? So we do, what we can do is we try to divide it up amongst Mincha, one Mar, someone else. Shacharit, actually we can divide up Shacharit. Though we see now, the main thing is Kaddishes and Baruch Hu, right? Those are the main things. But keep in mind, and with this we'll conclude, the whole idea of the Kaddish is that a person is serving as a merit for the deceased. That this person has left a child in the world, or whatever relative it is, who is doing this on their behalf, who is creating what we call a Kiddush Hashem, a sanctification of God's name, inspiring others to say, may God's name be great, and to accept that and hopefully internalize that. That is sanctifying God's name. For them to say, blessed is Hashem, Hamavorach, who is blessed, that is creating a sanctification of God's name. So something that I feel very strongly about is if I have a yard site and someone else has a yard site, and either I or that person, we can't split up for whatever reason, and it's either me or the other person who's doing it, so instead of there being any machloket, instead of there being any dispute or any ill will, another Kiddush Hashem, another way to sanctify God's name is to say, let me be sure that davening here in a shul, which is a holy act, will not be a cause of dissent and ill will. And let me tell a person, yes, you absolutely, you go ahead and you lead the davening, and I'll say the Kaddish at the end. So very often we run the risk of focusing on the act and forgetting what the reason, what the whole background of that act is. And that is why also, besides saying Kaddish, right, a person, or we have a custom, an interesting custom, that when a person has a yard site, very often a person will make like a little bit of a Kiddush. They'll sponsor a Kiddush, or they'll bring some food in, right? Are we celebrating a death? Why are we bringing in the food? The idea is that by your sponsoring that Kiddush and bringing in some food, the brachot, the blessings that are being made in the honor of, in the merit of the person who passed away. So we are increasing, right, the custom that you have some schnapps, you have some liquor, just what I need, right, at 7:15 in the morning. Right? The reason why we have that is actually twofold, or maybe it's more, but one is that we say l'chaim. When a person has that, we wish them for life, right? So as the South African custom is to wish someone long life, right, we're wishing them l'chaim. But another reason is that the blessing that's made on that is shehakol niyeh bidvaro. Blessed are you, Hashem, the master of the universe, that everything came about through your words. Now that is, in a way, what we call tziduk hadin, that is accepting God's judgment. And therefore, even though I am suffering the loss of whichever relative it is that I'm commemorating the yard site of, but I accept shehakol niyeh bidvaro, everything comes about via God's will, and I'm encouraging others to pronounce that and to accept that. But more generally, it's that mitzvot should be done as a result and in the memory and honor of that person. Now, let's take this a step further, where this will end. So therefore, really any mitzvah, right? These are the ones that have been established. I'm not in any way taking away the importance, but recognize the importance of any mitzvah that a person decides to take upon themselves and encourage others to do in the merit of the deceased. And if it's a child, it's not even in the merit of the deceased, because automatically any good thing that we do that's being done in this world is only as a result of our parents who brought us into this world. So anything and everything that we do that is positive in this world, serves as a merit to them that they are still producing in this world. This world is still becoming a better place through them, because of them, through the children that they brought into this world. So again, the Kaddish is important, leading davening is important, every mitzvah, everything that we do is important, and the overarching motivation must be to create this Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name, making God great in this world, and on a practical level, where we do have the custom that many say the Kaddish, it's important that the many say the Kaddish in unison, thereby eliciting the response that is the reason for which the Kaddish, these added Kaddishes, were instituted. And ideally, if a person can lead the services, then the person should lead the services.
Rabbi?
Yes.
What about women? Women, from the way I was raised, I didn't say Kaddish for my father.
Okay.
My
So,
brothers did. I have 3 brothers, but women
okay.
don't.
So,
Yes.
so as we saw, and it's interesting, I thought about that as we came to that of a minor, right? Of a minor saying Kaddish. So normally, I shouldn't say normal, well, certainly the older, more accepted practice had been that the men say Kaddish, women don't say Kaddish. Meaning the whole davening that this is a part of, davening with a minyan, right, is something that is an obligation for a man, not an obligation for a woman. Right? In many communities, in our community, I will encourage the women that if that would be meaningful for them, that they definitely should say the Kaddish, and we'll say it at a pace that everyone is comfortable saying it at, and often we'll post a man close to the mechitza so that the woman can hear exactly where the group is at, and they could also join in unison and check with the men and say the Kaddish. So for women, it's not that same obligation, but then again, right? But they can. But again, it's not limited to the Kaddish. I mean, that which we do for a parent is not limited to Kaddish. Right? It encompasses all that we do, right, in the merit of, and as a child, it's de facto, it's automatically, right, in the merit of that parent, because we're only here because of them. Hazel, is that your question also?
No, yes, my question was also, I was under the impression you had to be blood related in order to say Kaddish.
That's
the impression.
yes. So ideally, that is the case. In a situation where there is no one to say, where there is no blood relative, then we should have someone else say the Kaddish. Ideally, the family should hire that person. Why is it ideal that they hire the person? Because that gives them a real portion in it, right? If they're not doing it, right, it's got to be a merit to the family, which then reflects as a merit to the deceased. If they're not really doing anything towards that happening, so it's a bit contrived, right, how the merit is going to, work its way back up, right? But we do have situations where others will say the Kaddish when there's no one, when there is no blood relative to say the Kaddish. Yeah.
So if a minor who, him or herself doesn't count for minyan, can say this last so-called mourners Kaddish, why for Kaddish do we need a minyan?
Kaddish is called a davar shebekadusha, a matter of holiness. And that is only said when there is a minyan. That's only allowed to be said when there is a minyan. If there's no minyan, it can't be said. Not everyone who's saying it needs to be someone who's counting towards that minyan, but it can only be said when there is a minyan.
So that mourners Kaddish was instituted with the premise that any minor would be outside the quorum, would be extra to the quorum.
Well, there's no quorum. It was instituted as part of davening with a quorum. A quorum means 10 people who are bar mitzvah, right? Otherwise, you don't have it. right? So yeah, it was never a thought that that person would count towards the minyan, right? A minyan, we have very clear definitions of what a minyan
But
is.
he can say it if there is a minion.
If there is a
If
minion,
minor and there's a
yes.
minion, he can say it. If there's no minion, then the minor cannot say it.
Exactly. If there's no minion, a minor cannot say it, and a major, and an adult cannot say it
No,
either.
that's understandable.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct. Without a minion, no one can say it. Yeah, and there's nothing more heartrending than hearing that small voice of a child saying Kaddish.
Why does it have to be for, is it 11 months saying Kaddish?
Okay. So the
What
custom,
time frame?
yes. So the custom is that we say it for 11 months, and the reason for that is that we have a teaching that the longest. Obviously, this tax collector was a unique individual, but the longest anyone will need to go through this purification process in the world to come is 12 months. That's the longest that a person will have to go through.
But not
This,
the spouse.
the longest a person needs to go through a purification process is 12 months. Therefore, we say Kaddish not for 12 months, which would be, in fact, implying that this person needs the maximum purification process. So our custom is that we stop after 11 months. And then again, there are varying customs. Amongst the Ashkenazim, we say it 11 months and then we'll say it again at the yard site. Amongst the Sephardim, it's a little bit different. We're confusing two things. We only have mourning for a year for a parent, and therefore the Kaddish would be for a year for a parent. For anyone else, right, whether spouse or sibling or child, it's a 30-day mourning duration, right? Nevertheless, the Kaddish we still would say, or get, if that person's not saying, have someone say the Kaddish for the full 11 months. Even for a spouse or a child, something like that. Yes?
Why do mirrors have to be covered?
So that is, in a mourner's, why are mirrors covered? Right? That is a more Kabbalistic idea that in on a practical level, right, in a house of mourning, it's not a time that we're concerned about appearances. Right? On a more Kabbalistic, right? So I'm not, my focus is not, just how my hair. Wait, wait, 1 second. Problem with that, right? Just how I look, right? Yeah. Saves time with shampoo, right? Yeah. All right. So we're not focusing on the external appearances, and there's also more Kabbalistic reasons at play in terms of the souls that might. There's other things going on also from there.
It's not obligatory.
Look, is it that's the custom. The custom is to do that, right? It's not a Torah law, right?
That's what I mean.
But it's not found in the Torah, right? But it is right. It is certainly the well-established custom to do that.
Ashkenaz and Sephardi?
I'm not sure.
No Sfardim, obviously.
Yeah. Sorry?
There are no Sfardim, obviously.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yes.
I heard an interesting talk a while back that sort of the time of death and mourning is a very challenging time for faith of a person, and so immediately after, if you correct me, that some of the mitzvah are suspended because you can't daven with kavan, you can't.
Yes. So that's actually talking about the mitzvah. The positive commands are suspended from the time of death until the time of burial. Okay, until the time of burial.
Because it's a challenging time for faith.
Well, a number of reasons are given. One of them is that a person needs to be fully involved in setting up the proper burial as expediently as we possibly can, and therefore there's nothing else that you're involved with besides that. But also, I believe Rav Soloveitchik writes that it's a time when there is this open wound, and Hashem, and a person is feeling a tremendous amount of pain, and perhaps some anger also.
It goes to the same idea we said about accepting that everything is God's will.
Yeah.
What you said later on.
Yeah.
So is there an aspect of the Kaddish that goes to helping a person stay on track with their faith and reestablish their faith because it's a commandment or a mitzvah to be doing the Kaddish 3 times a day, leading services to get them back in the game, as it were?
I think it does all of that and then some. It certainly helps keep a person, doesn't allow them to just shut themselves out and disappear.
Is that
right?
teaching, or
Right.
is it just something that makes sense?
I think it's just a practical understanding, right? But what's interesting is that the Kaddish doesn't mention anything about death, right? It mentions God in this world, and I think that is, as you said, Marty, that is a big chunk of it. That if a person can accept that there's God that's running this world and there's a plan, and even though we don't always understand, and we often rarely understand all that goes into the plan. There's a story that I tell over and over is of the rabbi who survived the Holocaust, and someone approached him and said, "Don't you have questions?" And he said, "Oh boy, do I have questions. I have more questions than you can imagine. I also believe that God has the answers. And my concern is if I demand these questions, God might say, okay, come here. I'll give you the answer. And I'm willing to take my time before I get the answer." Right? But the Kaddish is really our way of accepting that we don't. Right? This is God's world, and God runs this world in a godly way that we who are not God cannot fathom and will not fathom. At least as long as we are here in this earthly world. And Kaddish does speak of God's greatness in the world. So I think it does address that.
Sorry,
Yes.
one last question. If someone dies and has to have an autopsy, and in Jewish law you don't have an autopsy, can the rabbi overrule the court or the law?
Look, what the rabbi can try to do is intercede and do his best to get the coroner, whoever it is, whoever makes a decision, to let it go, right?
But who has the final say?
Not the rabbi.
And
the court.
Not the father of the child that might have.
Whatever law dictates, that is who has the final say. However, it is important that in a situation where if there does have to be an autopsy, that the rabbi or someone be allowed to go along and to make sure that all parts of the body are returned or given over in order that there can be a proper burial of all the parts of the body.
But we are allowed to donate parts.
Okay, we are allowed to donate parts of the body, right? Not to science, but to save lives. Okay, right? But it gets very interesting, and that's really a whole other lunch and learn topic we could spend, that maybe we could and should do, and that is the time of death. It's the Harvard protocols they came out with was that brain death, right? If they detect or they see that there is a cessation of brain activity, the person is considered dead. Now, what prompted that was a lack of organs. Meaning, if you wait until the heart stops, then many organs are no longer able to be transplanted. Right? So you have many, right? So it's important to keep in mind that what prompted that whole study and decision was a lack of organs. So then they said, okay, well that is considered legally dead, in which case then you can remove that beating heart. You can remove these parts of the body from this person who, according to their criterion, is brain dead, but the heart is beating because he's legally dead, and therefore removing those organs is not legally killing the person, and thereby they increase greatly the amount of organs that were available and eligible for successful transplants. From a halachic point of view, there are different opinions. I would say the majority. There are opinions that say yes, we can accept brain death, and they view it as a medical decapitation, meaning if a situation where a person was decapitated and the heart is still beating, as I'm sure it would for the next 20 to 30 seconds. Dr. Flam, would you agree with that? For however,
Perhaps even longer.
Even longer, right? So then everyone would agree that heart can be removed, right? That's not taking out the for a transplant, right? That would not be killing the person. So those who argue that brain death is in fact, besides legal death, it's also halakhic death, they'll say that basically it's physiological decapitation. Okay? Others say that, someone just recently sent me an article about someone who was brain dead and then came back. Right? So do we really know what's fully going on? It's hard to say. So to say that it's really like physiological decapitation is an argument that certainly can be argued. And many halachic opinions is that if the heart is beating, the person is alive. And therefore you cannot start to remove organs. That would be killing the person. So yes, a person can be an organ donor, but I would recommend that it needs to be done under the auspices of some halachic guidance, because if it's following simply the medical criterion, then they'll consider, our death is nothing to do with the brain, nothing to do with the heart. It's when the soul leaves. Great. When is that? So that we need to look at our sources. And the sources speak about cessation of breathing and of heartbeat. Right? Now maybe it could be argued, well, they didn't know about all the brain, so there was no way of measuring that. Now that we can measure that, that would have also been included. Maybe, maybe not. Right? I would say when it comes to these things, better to be better to err on the side of caution. Akira.
Can a Jewish person take a non-Jewish heart?
Yeah, that's either way. Jew to give to a non-Jew, to receive from a non-Jew, all that is irrelevant.
Two questions. One is when we see with someone he passed away, and then he left something good, and then people praise him or do good things because of this deceased person, and he elevated.
Correct.
What if the people who's bad, and then this one they say, "Ooh, we don't want to get associated with him." Will that bring that person more down, or doesn't it?
Interesting, right? So
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So Akira said, people who will not want to help a person who passed away, who was an evil person. So I think we see from Rabbi Akiva that that's not the right path. Right? The townspeople didn't want to give this kid a circumcision. Right? That was not the right path. We look at Rabbi Akiva, who showed us the right path is to go to such lengths to help a fellow person, to help a soul. Right? That was in anguish, even though this person was evil, this person was rogue, and he never knew this person, never met this person. Right? But we should do whatever we can do to help each and every person. Coming back to the question you asked before, Yakira, about your parents. So I don't know if Kaddish is a relevant way to give honor to your parents as they were as they're not Jewish. Because Kaddish is a uniquely Jewish way to give honor to a Jewish person who passed away. But in the more general sense, right, you and your wonderful family will certainly give tremendous blessing to your parents in the hereafter by all the good things that you are doing. Again, I think Kaddish is a uniquely Jewish way for a Jewish person to say for another Jewish person who passed. But when we look at it more broadly, right? Certainly there's a tremendous amount. We'll take the last question, and then we'll let people get back to work.
So in
You have to choose. You have to decide which one,
relevant
and then you can answer the other one afterwards.
relevant to Yakir's question is, since we're all B'Tselem Elohim, why is the deceit? Why is it only relevant to
Again, because
Jewish people?
Kaddish is a Jewish prayer, and the Kaddish Kaddish is part of the Jewish prayers, and this Kaddish Yasam was instituted as a Jewish prayer for a Jewish person who deceased. Right, so that's why that would be. Okay, we'll call it over here, Dov, and we will. One of the things mentioned that he taught him was how to bench. So we'll also go ahead.
I'm
Go
not
ahead.
looking at- we can say in some of that